PinkNews. Started as the blog of former dot-com millionaire Benjamin Cohen, it's now the world's largest LGBT news website.
They grew exponentially from being just a few people in an office to suddenly becoming quite a large company.
As its popularity has grown, so too has its influence, championing major movements in LGBT history, including the legalisation of gay marriage.
There was a real history and heritage of influencing and working with politicians.
With millions of readers and millions in turnover, it's become a powerhouse of digital publishing and claims to be an inclusive, empowering place to work.
When I first joined, it felt like a dream job. I thought I could make a difference.
But when an anonymous account called PinkNews Whistleblowers started posting online, questions began to be asked. What was PinkNews really like behind closed doors?
And we couldn't believe that we'd got it, and then by the end of it, the dreams were just shattered.
I know that many people who have gotten out of that working environment see it like getting out of an abusive relationship.
I've spoken to more than 30 former and current staff at PinkNews who claim a heavy drinking culture at the company led to sexual misconduct from Benjamin and his husband, PinkNews director Anthony James. Did you ever raise an official complaint? Did you ever try and speak to anybody?
When the CEO of the company is supposedly the biggest liability at the Christmas party, it's not a great look.
There were some male staff members that we would think, oh yeah, don't let him be in a room alone with Ben.
Anthony has been witnessed doing these things by multiple people, and he's been allowed to do it by a system that has fueled this toxic culture, and that's what people need to know.
Just check your mic.
Thank you.
Do a sync clap. Okay.
My name's Polly Shute. My pronouns are she, her. My job title was head of corporate partnerships. I'm a big fan of the LGBTQ media and the role that it has in supporting the community and telling the stories that need to be heard. So for me, when the role came up, it felt like a natural job to do from what I'd done before.
My name's Stefan. I was a producer at PinkNews for around 3 years. And when I joined, it seemed like an amazing place to work for LGBT plus people, especially because I've worked in places before that weren't supportive or just were uneducated. It was kind of a breath of fresh air to walk into a place and I didn't have to hide who I was or pretend. I could just openly exist, and that wasn't going to affect my job or the way I was treated in theory.
In some ways, a dream job.
Yeah, and I'm not the only person that has said that. I've heard that from a fair few people who worked there as well.
Initially, they actually approached me about the job just to help them put the job spec together. And then I said, actually, I'd be interested in applying for this. And I went through, in fairness, they took me through a proper interview process. I had a final interview at their head office. And yeah, it felt like all the things that I love, working in partnership and connecting good brands to good causes, and then working for what I thought at the time was a really hard-hitting and inclusive LGBTQ media title.
It's one of the only places that you can go to for LGBT plus specific news. It, I would say, used to shed important light on issues that no other media organisations were really talking about.
From its offices in London, but with audiences across the world, PinkNews' reputation as a website willing to tackle key issues saw its readership reach millions. How important was it for you that it was an LGBT plus company that you were working for?
Really important. The stars were finally aligning for the community. I felt like we could actually do something with that and, bring the activism that PinkNews had and apply it to the business world and to politics and more.
You wanted to make a difference.
The fact that PinkNews was so big and growing fast meant that we could bring people together in a way that I don't think you see these days.
The people Kai talks about were some of the most influential people in the country. Celebrities, activists, and even prime ministers all wanted to be seen attending the PinkNews Awards.
Well, good evening, and it's a huge pleasure to join you tonight.
Quite high-profile people would go to that event to show support for the queer community and for what PinkNews was doing at the time.
We were the only publisher that really was working across the aisle with politicians of all stripes. We had the party leaders of every single major political party come do speeches and support the LGBT community.
Did you go to any of those events with politicians and things like that?
Yeah, I went to
What
a
kind of
few.
people did you meet there? What did you see?
A mixed bag, definitely. There were people that I really enjoyed meeting, some really lovely queer and especially trans activists that I've looked up to for a long time. I didn't love some of the politicians they invited, I'm not going to lie. I didn't agree with a lot of the policies that those people were holding.
No, that influence, doesn't come overnight. I really think it came from Ben's hard work in the same-sex marriage campaign, but there was certainly influence there, and we used that to our advantage.
PinkNews began as the side hustle of this man, Benjamin Cohen. With early businesses in the porn industry and a social media website for the Jewish community, he became known as one of Britain's first .com millionaires. Later, while working as technology correspondent for Channel 4, he launched PinkNews, and quickly it became known for its campaigning journalism in support of same-sex marriage.
It's about equality and about freedom.
In 2018, he married his partner, former GP Dr. Anthony James, who joined the business and eventually became Chief Operating Officer and one of the company's directors.
And initially things were good. They seemed to care about the people that worked there, they seemed to care about causes, and it felt like a good place. But there were inklings that came up, small signs that now I look back on, I can see that they made me feel uncomfortable.
I mean, I can't even put my finger on when it first started. It was big worries about money, which I understand it's a business, but it kind of became the sole focus of everything, to the point where the content itself was just thrown to the wayside.
In 2022, PinkNews' revenue had reached millions of pounds. The launch of its Snapchat channel gave it a huge audience, but for some staff, chasing online attention signalled a departure from the core values of the company.
A lot of the content was like that. What has this straight person on TikTok done today? Like, what drama has happened? And then even if we would platform queer people, it was the most horrendous, problematic people. It's not good journalism for a start, and it's not important. It kind of just became, we have to make everything really quickly, and it has to get millions and millions of views every single day because we need to make money.
I started hearing from people in the team, particularly younger people in the team, who felt a lot of pressure on them, who felt unsupported around their mental health. It began to become more of something that went into my consciousness rather than something that I kind of chose to ignore.
A Twitter account that surfaced, anonymously run, nobody knows who's behind it, I don't. They started posting accounts from their experience from working at PinkNews. And this quickly gained some traction because people very quickly started quote tweeting the tweets with their own experiences, myself included, to the point where it grew quite a following, and people then started DMing them with detailed accounts of their experiences.
It was this online account that first led me to look into PinkNews and what staff were saying it was like to work there. While the concerns it shared, which PinkNews said were inaccurate and defamatory, shocked the LGBT community, it wasn't until I started speaking to former staff I realised the posts barely scratched the surface. Some of those who came forward agreed to do so on the condition of anonymity. Can you just explain to me why you are speaking to me today about your time at PinkNews?
Journalism is an industry that's dominated by white, straight men, essentially, and to be anything other than that is to be othered. And there's a lot of people who work at PinkNews who are there because it allows them to be their authentic self. But this is coming at a cost, and I think if it wasn't for that cost, then I wouldn't really be speaking to you.
When did you start to feel, maybe this place isn't for me, maybe it's not so great to work here?
There's a really, really strong culture around drinking and alcohol, which is, I feel like that's always been prevalent there, where they feel like the answer to every problem is just throwing alcohol at the workforce. The COO, who's Ben Cohen's husband, the CEO, he's been sexually inappropriate with junior members of staff whilst heavily intoxicated.
I've spoken to 5 people who claim they saw Dr. James kissing and groping a junior member of staff. All of them believe the person in question was too drunk to understand what was going on or to consent.
We just got back from COVID restrictions, so it felt like everyone was happy to be together, and there was a lot of alcohol that night, like so much, and people were not in the right frame of mind. Anthony was just forcing himself on somebody who wasn't able to make that decision for themselves because of how intoxicated they were.
Did they have enough mental faculty to consent, do you think?
No, absolutely not. They weren't capable of consenting to what had happened to them, but a lot of us did realise what had happened because a lot of us did witness it. But it felt like it kind of got dismissed, and the fact the CEO is married to the COO probably didn't hurt matters either. It was in the open, people could see it. It was kind of almost like arrogant in its openness. I don't know how else to kind of say it really. The person who was doing it was the COO of the company, and it was a junior member of staff, so I can't think of anything more inappropriate.
Other ex-Pink News staff have also told me they had concerns over a culture of drinking heavily at staff socials and events. One video they shared appears to show Benjamin falling asleep in the office, while Anthony appears to have taken his trousers off. It's at these sorts of events that staff allege Benjamin and Anthony's inappropriate behaviour would take place.
There was one time after a work event where we went to the pub and there were several other colleagues there. Over the course of the evening, colleagues left. Ben was extremely drunk to the point where he fell off his chair. He asked me out of earshot of my other colleagues, though there were colleagues nearby, whether I wanted to go back to his because Anthony, his husband, wasn't there. He said something along the lines of Anthony is always getting with other men. The suggestion was that we would do something sexually. I was extremely uncomfortable. I don't even remember how I responded, but I know that I quickly shut the conversation down. I alerted other colleagues, we got him into a taxi and he went home. Never heard about it again, no apology. Never was mentioned again, but it put me on alert because it made me realise that he thought that it was a boundary that he could cross.
I'm not saying none of us got drunk at events, but none of us behaved inappropriately with each other, whereas they did. So,
How did they behave inappropriately?
I mean, I have direct experience with it from a Christmas party we had. When I was just stood talking to my group of friends, and Ben ran past me and thought it would be appropriate to smack me on the bum, which is like, I wouldn't have even found that funny if like a team member had done it, let alone the CEO. I think I just like shut down for a minute. I just didn't even know what to say. I was in shock. I remember like turning to my friends and saying like, what the hell just happened?
Was there a pattern in terms of the type of person that they would target?
Intoxicated seemed to be the only pattern. All I could see was this was always fueled by alcohol. So it was people who couldn't make their own decisions, people who didn't know better.
There were some male staff members that we would think, oh yeah, don't let him be in a room alone with Ben. If you type the word creep in the group chat, Ben comes up in those messages like at least, I don't know, 6 or 7 times. It's different days, different topics, but everyone voiced that we don't feel comfortable around him.
During my time investigating Pink News, I've heard from 33 current and former members of staff. Hi, it's Josh from BBC News. Thanks for taking my call. Many say they felt the fact the 2 most senior leaders at the company were a married couple left them with nowhere to turn when they had concerns about their behaviour.
You never felt like there was really confidentiality or any sort of respect for confidentiality. His dad was the lawyer for the firm, his husband joined in a sort of senior role, his sister-in-law at one point was involved with HR. You couldn't separate the two, so I never felt if I raised a serious grievance that it would be heard or that it would be dealt with in a professional manner, as it would be in a professional organisation. I was also relatively young at the time, and I think a lot of the people in the company are relatively young when they start at Pink News. And so, you know, when you're faced with someone who is as formidable as Ben, you don't necessarily know how to stand up for yourself.
So none of us really felt like we could complain, even when it was justified, because we didn't know what was going to happen to us. You know, there was always like an implication of, don't piss Ben off, the worry of having a bad reputation when you're trying to work in that industry, because unfortunately, Ben is very well known, and we didn't know if he was going to badmouth us to people.
It kind of feels like, well, what happens if you speak out? You know, people are disappearing. People lose their jobs, redundancies, restructures. It's just a revolving door of staff and people just clinging onto that job.
I think if you spoke to other employees, the general consensus is that working at that company is extremely stressful. So I think your threshold for what's acceptable over the course of time shifts, and you need to step out of it to realise how inappropriate some of the stuff that went on actually was. When the CEO of the company is supposedly the biggest liability at the Christmas party, it's not a great look.
I realised my mental health was bad, my physical health was bad because I wasn't sleeping very well, and I was miserable, and so yeah, drafted my resignation. I've still got the text that I sent to my friends and I said, guys, I've done it, I'm out.
I know that many people who have gotten out of that working environment see it like getting out of an abusive relationship.
Every time we'd meet up, someone else would have left, so we got to like, that's not normal that you go, cheers to leaving. You normally say cheers to a new job, but we were all celebrating each other for getting out.
Despite what people have told me, it's clear they still really believe in the mission of Pink News. Almost everybody I've spoken to agrees it's important there's a place for stories about the LGBT community written by the LGBT community. What they couldn't agree on, though, was whether moving forward, that could still be Pink News. What do you think the future of Pink News is?
I think the only future for Pink News is a world where Ben is not at the centre of it, and that means putting in place really robust procedures, confidentiality procedures, proper HR that, holds Ben to account. There is a future for Pink News. Whether that's a positive one, I don't know. It's not the kind of place I would like to work in.
It is really important for queer people to have a resource like that. It does have a lot of eyes on it, and so when they do the work that they should be doing, it is important. I could probably list on one or maybe two hands the big queer media outlets we have, and while there are definitely room for more, and I'd love to see more, we have this existing one that's already huge. It's just not doing the work that it should be doing at the moment. And so I think if that can be overhauled, that could make a massive difference.
I think there'll always be a place for authentic queer-led journalism and queer-led stories. Unfortunately, I think Pink News has kind of lost its credibility in that arena. I think there's some really talented people there. There's probably more talented people there than there are jobs for them in the mainstream, which is why they're still there. I hope everyone is able to maintain a living in what they do, because ultimately I think our stories as queer people are better told by queer people than relying on the mainstream. But it's just a shame that Pink News is Pink News.